All right, ready?
Sure.
Okay. I just want to start out, after you completed college, from Denison University, I read in your bio you took a job fixing copiers, but, your passion for music was always there. Just tell me a little bit about what was going through your head at this time. You had got your music degree, but you weren't in music.
Well, after I got the music degree, the job that I took at that time, I never ever considered for a second that I wouldn't wind up doing music. Not for 1 second. I mean, to me, I had my own studio that I put together, and so I had to have a day job to pay the bill. Yeah. So I was working in the studio at night, and then working the day job during the day. So I never for a second thought that I was gonna, it was strictly just to get money. Mm-hmm. And so I actually was writing. My songwriting partner at the time was a guy named Foley. And he wound up leaving to go play with Miles Davis.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, I took a music director job for a one-hit wonder group called Teen Dream, who was signed to Warner Brothers back then. I was their musical director.
Okay.
And so I still had some things going on musically, mm-hmm. To where I had enough, stuff to do to where I hadn't really lost hope. But the copier job was strictly just for money. I never thought for a second that I wasn't going to wind up playing music.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned you were working as a musical director for what was the name of the group again? I'm sorry.
The group called Teen Dream.
Okay. Just tell me a little bit about.
They had a song called.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask. What's your role as a musical director working with a group? Because I'm just curious.
Mostly, it depends a lot on what the group needs. For that group, because they were kids, I had to basically get them up to the point where they had a live show, because they make the records and, producers can do whatever they do to make a record in the studio, but then, somebody has to get the act to the point where they have a live show and they can actually go out and perform those records. So as a musical director, I had to hire and train the band, basically give vocal coach the girls so that they could, sing their parts and just basically get them up to speed. Now, being a musical director for Gerald was a little different because he was a guy that brought a lot more to the table and had his own ideas about what he wanted, and you were just the guy to make it happen. But with these girls, I had to pretty much do everything, come up with the arrangements, make sure the band was rehearsed, teach them their parts, just everything as it relates to taking an act that has a record and making sure that they can actually perform those songs live.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So the music degree did come in handy at that point, just being able to do, vocal training and vocal coaching and being able to write out parts, for band members and all of that stuff. Because once you get to that level, rehearsals are costly. It's not like a garage band or basement band where you guys get together for the fun of it. Once you're at that level,
okay,
you're rehearsing as long as you want to. So you got to send out charts, and somebody has to write those charts out. And you have to be very prepared when you start rehearsing, because you're paying for a rehearsal space. You may be paying a sound company. It's just costly at that point.
Yep. Okay, cool. And eventually, you were working with Gerald Levert, and that's someone I was reading whose music you grew up admiring. So just tell me, what is it like, having the opportunity to work with someone like that whose music you grew up on?
It was like Christmas every day. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, because that guy, he had a very, very strong work ethic. So all the while we were working, you never got a chance to stop and think about it, because he was always busy trying to do the next thing.
Okay.
I mean, that guy was just, really incredible in that way. Yeah. And so a person coming from my background where, I worked 8 hours a day at a day gig, and then I spent 8 hours a night at my studio, I was used to, putting it in. So, I was right in my element when I got with this guy. I mean, and I think to some extent that was part of what became a rub between he and Mark Gordon, who was his songwriting partner when I first came along. Mm-hmm. Mark is fairly slow and methodical and deliberate, and Gerald was kind of impatient.
Yeah.
Like he wanted to move a lot faster to get stuff done, and I was used to working like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what caused us to be able to get along well musically.
Yeah.
But it was like, because I came from Columbus, we just didn't really know. I mean, I knew some of the guys who were in like Rick James' band, and I met Jonathan Moffett, who wound up playing with the Jacksons. I actually was supposed to do Michael Jackson's last tour as a drummer.
Oh, wow.
I mean, like I knew sort of guys like that. There was a guy named Skip Anderson that left to go play with Luther Vandross and was with him for a while. But for the most part, we didn't really know people like Gerald.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't a lot of people from Columbus at that time. So for me to have access to a guy like that was like, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
It was like, what I would have expected, if I had moved to LA or New York or something.
Yeah.
So I was pretty happy about it all. I mean, it's still probably the single biggest life-changing thing that's happened thus far.
Mm-hmm. And, since you've had a chance to work with him extensively, can you share with me a memory or something you remember most about him and your time spent with him?
There's so many.
Yeah.
I tell you one that was really funny because I learned a valuable lesson from that musically. Because me coming from a guy that started out in the 80s in the music thing, that's when sequencers and drum machines and all of that stuff became, prevalent and popular, and sort of like what auto-tune is now.
Mm-hmm.
When something first gets introduced in the music, people take it too far. And so with that stuff, you have the possibility of making things perfect. Because you can sequence it. I mean, you can do it over and over and over again until it's right. It wasn't like the 70s where, you just played the tracks down. You could make it correct. The drum machines, you can make it perfect. So we were working on some songs for like Keith Washington, I believe.
Okay.
And we put the ideas down, and we got it, got the ideas down. He left for the day. I stayed up all night perfecting those tracks,
Mm-hmm.
getting them, correcting all the little mistakes we made, and I was, happy to play it for him the next day. And, he's like, yeah, man, that sounds great. Put that motherfucker back how it was. So,
Oh, man.
so luckily I had saved the tracks I started with, and so I had to put it back, and he said, yeah, you made it perfect, but you took all the feeling out of it because you made it perfect.
Oh, wow.
And so I learned a lesson from that sometimes when something feels good, that's more important than it being technically correct.
Yep.
And so I started to pay a lot more attention to that in the records I made from that point on, because I was, I probably used to go too far trying to make things perfect.
Yep.
And sometimes you can perfect the feeling out of something. And I mean, that one thing there probably had a profound effect on the way I approached producing records from that point forward.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Okay. Can you just share with me also, like, the process when you're making a record, producing a record, the thought process and the work you put in from start to finish, basically just, the overall start to finish of it, just a brief overview?
Well, because all records don't start in the same way. These things don't start in order, but basically, I'm looking to say something that everybody can identify with,
Yep.
but may not necessarily have been said that way, which is a tricky thing because there's not a whole lot. There's certain things that we sing about all the time, but there's certain things we say all the time, but we don't necessarily sing about them.
Yep.
So that when a person hears you sing that thing, it may be something very familiar to them because it's something they've said all the time, but maybe nobody thought to make a song of it. Or you have to just figure out how to say something. There has to be the balance between something that's familiar but with a twist, which, well, I guess that's in everything in life. But there's that thought. And then there's the thought that musically the song has to be accessible to people. I think that people are willing to take a great song from an okay singer quicker than they take an okay song from a great singer.
Yep.
I mean, they want the song to be great. They want to be able to sing along. Their song has to be accessible to the point where, they can sing along with it and get it. I think about those things, and I also think about the artist. What is it that this artist can do to differentiate themselves from all the other people that are out there tune you or do whatever they got to do to you to make you sound like the vision that's in their head, then so be it. But sometimes I think they don't necessarily concentrate enough on giving the artist their own thing so that they have no, per se, identifiable sound.
Yeah.
And so you become an artist that's you're subject to whatever hit you may have at any given point, but nobody can figure out what you stand for because you are almost a reflection of the producer more so than of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that happen in a lot of music nowadays. And I don't think that people are doing it maliciously or selfishly. They're just not thinking about it that way. And like, I'm here to advance the career of this artist, this musician. I need to make sure first and foremost that the record I make is giving that artist some voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from that point, everything, you know, else after that is up for grabs in terms of how it's approached. But those are the things that matter the most to me when I make a record.
Okay. Okay, cool. And you know, I'd like to ask you, you know, coming out of Cleveland, you know, what was it like? Because when you think of Cleveland, you don't necessarily think of, you know, big music scene. You mainly think New York, California. You know, what was it like coming out of Cleveland, growing up in the music scene? Did you see a lot of talent around you? You know, just comment on that if you could.
Well, it might not be fair for me to totally answer that because I didn't grow up in Cleveland. I actually moved to Cleveland specifically to work with Gerald. I was actually living in Columbus.
I apologize.
But when I got to Cleveland, you know, there was a whole bunch of music happening in Cleveland, and there was a lot of people from Cleveland that just didn't stay because they felt they couldn't make their careers happen in Cleveland. But there was a lot of folks from there. I was surrounded by, you know, at that time the Rude Boys were just getting started, Men at Large was just getting started. I worked on their albums initially. Levert was around, the OJs were around, the Daz Band was still doing their thing. Not too long after that, Avant got going. Howard Hewitt was from right up the street. There were folks around, and when I was down in Columbus, you know, I used to run down to Dayton all the time, and you know, Roger Troutman and those guys were down there. And there was a lady from my church choir, believe it or not, who started singing with Roger and those guys named Shirley Murdoch.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I mean, there were folks around, you know. So it was always sort of a desire on my part to try to make the music scene on the professional side, you know, step up, because the talent was here, but people didn't stay because they felt like they couldn't make the career happen from where they were. But there were people around.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a crazy amount of talent in this town. It's just, you know, the great ones just don't stay.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. And also, you know, I was reading in your bio, you produced 6 songs on Joe's debut album, and he's a personal favorite of mine. And you also did his big hit, I Want to Know. You know, I just would like to know, what was it like working with him?
Well, that's funny, actually, that, you know, the bio thing is actually a little bit incorrect because it wasn't Joe's debut album. It was actually his second album because he had a first album, I think it was on Polygram or something, that didn't really do too much.
Oh, okay.
But it was kind of like his breakout album, which was actually the sophomore album called All That I Am.
Okay. Good.
And working with Joe was really, really cool because the kid's crazy talented. But the funny part is I actually wound up working with him as a favor to a girl I was dating at the time named Peace Williams. And she was managing Joe. And I guess Joe had taken he'd gotten into dance from Jive and hadn't turned in any music. So she asked me to help him finish one song just because she was going to these Tuesday creative meetings and they kept asking, where's the Joe record? Do you have anything? Do you have anything? She never had anything to turn in and no updates or whatever. So just kind of to keep her from looking bad, she asked me to help him at least get one song done, and it actually wound up being a title song, All That I Am. Yeah. And the president of Jive at the time, Clyde Calder, heard the song and asked me to help Joe finish the album. Yeah. So that's how I wound up finishing the record. And out of the 6 songs, one of them was actually one that I did with Joe called House Soon. Okay. But Joe was a talented guy, but, you know, funny, I Want to Know was supposed to be on that album.
Oh, wow.
But Peace asked me to play live bass on the record. Joe, I think, resented the fact that Peace was involved on the music side of stuff because he felt that should have been his call. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't agree, so he took the song off the album. But at that time, working with Joe, I was actually working with Gerald during the day from maybe 11 o'clock in the morning to 7 at night.
Mm-hmm.
I would rush to the airport, catch the 8:40 flight to New York. I would work with Joe from about 10 o'clock till at night till 5 o'clock in the morning, and catch the 6:30 flight back to Cleveland. Get about an hour, hour and a half of sleep, and be back at the studio with Gerald at 11 in the morning.
Wow.
And I was doing that a couple days a week until we got that record done. Because Gerald was the kind of person that said, I'm never going to stop you from doing other things with other people, but when I want you to be here, you better be here.
Wow.
So that was the only way I could get the time to do the record with Joe.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy.
Which was crazy because, I mean, I was worn out, but I felt like as much as I enjoyed working with Gerald, I felt that it was important to me to have a few things in my discography that maybe reflected some other styles musically than just, because what I did with Gerald was a very specific kind of thing. It was, reflection of what he wanted to do musically. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't necessarily totally a reflection of everything that I may have been capable of, so it was kind of important to me from a career standpoint. And I liked working with Joe because he's a talented kid.
Yeah. Wow. Crazy story. Okay. And now tell me a little bit about your company, I Brighton, and how you started it and what your plans, in the future are for it.
I Brighton is a company that was started, 2 years ago, and it's basically something that I plan to have as a vehicle to concentrate on artists like Vesta, artists like Eddie Levert, who I plan to be making a record on, and various other friends of mine who are in situations where maybe a major looks at them and says, well, maybe your sales wouldn't be enough for me to be interested in you, but first of all, it's enough to interest me simply because I like the music that they make. I personally believe that there's still a market out there for good grown-up R&B music. I just believe there is. And I think that majors have to concentrate on their bottom line, and if they have to spend $500,000 to make a record on person A who's 18 and may not be a seasoned veteran artist, but they could sell more records, versus person B who may sell less records, but it may be a better record. They have to kind of do option A because their mandate is to make money. That's what they're there to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm at a place career-wise where I feel like I can take those projects simply because of the love of the music and because I believe there's a demand out there for it. Mm-hmm. And so this company is going to concentrate solely on stuff like that.
Okay. And
just for people that I've always wanted to record, like Vesta is a person I always wanted to make a record on. And I actually was supposed to make a record on her in the 90s.
Yeah.
Andre Fisher had hired me, but he got fired before we got a chance to make the record. Mm-hmm. That was in '95, I want to say. So she and I have talked about it for years. She's the first artist, that I'm going to put out. But
okay. Well,
it was like working with somebody older.
Yeah.
Because he's just an old soul, and so. Mm-hmm. When I first came to Cleveland, I actually started writing initially with Eddie. Mm-hmm. And so he was the one that suggested to Gerald that Gerald give me a shot to write with him. Mm-hmm. And so, these are the folks that, the music that I grew up on, I just always wanted to do records with them, and I'm just having a ball, man, because it's just, to work with somebody you idolized when you were a kid, there's just no better feeling than that.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I believe there's a market for the music. I just believe that. And it may not necessarily be the same market that, Lil Wayne may enjoy or Lady Gaga, but that's okay. Mm-hmm. There are people that do that, and I want to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was reading that in your bio about how you felt, labels are focusing more on younger artists and prefabricated pop stars, and I fully agree. I just wanted to get your opinion. Do you think real R&B music, which I'm a huge fan of myself, will ever prominently have a place again in the mainstream, maybe on the radio? You know, because right now it's definitely not like it used to be.
Absolutely. Everything that's new becomes old, and everything that's old becomes new again. And there's going to come a point when, because here's the thing, whenever a trend starts in music, everybody jumps on the bandwagon until they run it in the ground, and they look for something new. So what's going on musically now, people are inevitably going to get tired of it.
Yep.
And I hear young cats saying to me now, you know, that they want to get a band together and go in the studio and just cut their tracks, you know, live and all that stuff, and they think it's like a new, phenomenal new thing. And it's like, dude, that's the way it used to be.
Yeah.
So it's inevitable that it comes back because, you know, the other thing can only go so far. You can only take it so far before it ceases to be interesting. And live music, stuff that's played live, you know, it's definitely, you know, the church is producing all of these musicians, you know, because for a while that was the only place people could play. You know, there weren't any club gigs. You know, if you were black, there were no club gigs, you know, per se. You know, the pro gigs are few, you know, there's not that many of them, so the church has been producing, and plus the music in the church is so unrestricted, I'll use that word, that, you know, the church is producing a lot of young musicians who want outlets to do what they do, and they don't want to play that stuff you hear on the radio with just like a clap going and some auto-tune vocal. That's not interesting to them. And so they're going to look for outlets to do their thing, and they're the ones that's going to bring, you know, the newer music. You know, it's just going to be what the old music was, but it's going to be a younger voice singing it, and so it'll suddenly be new. We'll know that it's not new, but we'll keep our mouths shut to let them think that they've done something. And that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's inevitable.
Okay. Now, hypothetically speaking, and this might be a little bit tough to answer, but say that no artist, you know, out right now, we're currently signed to any record label, and you could add any 5 artists to your I Brighton roster. You know, can you tell me who they would be?
Ooh, that is tough. Because there's some folks that are already signed, but I would tell you there are people who I've always wanted to work with. I've always wanted to work with Aretha Franklin, believe it or not. I like Glenn Jones's voice. I love Shaka Khan. There are some younger folks that I really, really like Dave Hollister. I love his voice.
Yeah.
You know, Stokely from In Condition, who's actually a very good friend of mine. I love his voice. I mean, and these are not necessarily older people, but I like what they do. And I think that, you know, given the right opportunity to make something happen, that I would love to do records with them. You know, whether that will or will not happen, you know, remains to be seen. But there's probably so many that I couldn't even, and like I would hear somebody on the radio and say, you know what, you're on the radio, but I would love to make a better record for you than the one I hear because you're better than that. I think P.O. Bryson is somebody that you know would be great for him to have a great record right now. Will Downing, I mean, Will's probably got a thing going on right now, but you know, Eddie is, you know, I'm itching to make this Eddie Levert record because, you know, I feel like I know what kind of record he needs to make.
Yeah.
There's just so many out there that ain't even funny. But hopefully that's a few.
Yeah. Okay, good. And you know, do you have a favorite song that you may have produced or worked on?
That one I probably feel like I haven't made it yet.
Okay.
Because I feel like the things that I've done thus far, most of them to me were almost like works for hire, in the sense that that particular artist was looking for a specific thing, and I tried my best to provide that which they were you know, wanting. But I feel like the best work that's in me hasn't been released yet.
Okay.
And so, you know, that's hard to say. I mean, a lot of what I did with Gerald, I'm very proud of. But I feel like I haven't done my best work yet.
Okay.
So it's to be announced.
Yeah. Okay. And just one last question for you. You know, as a producer and a songwriter, When you make a song for an artist and basically do the work behind the scenes, you know, um, I don't want to say do you ever get jealous, but do you ever, feel a certain way when that artist goes on to turn that song into a hit and gets all the fame, and you might not get as much recognition? Does it ever make you feel some type of way?
No, because that's the whole point.
Hmm.
I mean, I never really actually, you see, when I originally decided I wanted to be a producer, I didn't know that producers could be famous anyway.
Yeah.
It was only in the era when Teddy Riley came along, and I guess Prince to some extent right before that, when he had his couple of groups, the Apollonia Six, the Vanity, and all of those folks, and then Teddy Riley came along. So he ushered into me the era of the producer.
Hmm.
But before that, when I was making the decision to be a producer, I wasn't ever aware that those folks really got any notoriety anyway. So the music was all that ever mattered to me. That's the reason why my relationship with Gerald worked so well, because I had no interest in the limelight. I just want to make music. I was never interested in being famous.
Yeah.
And to some extent that was to my detriment, because a lot of people didn't know who I was, even though I did records that they knew, but because I never made any effort to bring any of the attention to myself.
Hmm.
It's just, I love music. I don't necessarily love, the assumed stereotypical lifestyle that would come along with what people think of when they think of a record producer or whatever. I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
I just loved making the music, and if you're able to take that and move on and make something with it, that was the whole point.
Hmm. Okay. Fair enough.
I never aspired to be an artist, so, I never cared.
Yeah. Because from my point of view, I'm the type of person, I buy an album, I immediately open up and read the liner notes, see who wrote each song, see who produced it, the instruments. That really interests me, and I just, my thing is I wish producers could get more of the spotlight, because some of them are even more talented than the artist in some sense, who the artist doesn't even write the song themselves, and if you know what I'm saying?
And I agree that there, like, to me, I would say that getting a nod from my peers means a lot to me, but
Yeah.
if I'm able to produce a song that takes the artist to the next level, then to me, that's like mission accomplished.
Yeah.
I did what I was supposed to do. And I think that's in much the same way. Plenty of times engineers don't get the notoriety that perhaps they deserve, because they take something that doesn't sound stellar when they get it and they turn it into something that sounds great. But I'm okay with that. I mean, I actually thought about doing it like a producer series of records where I would take, producer friends of mine, like the Chucky Bookers of the world, and, folks like that are the friends that I know would make great records, but never, just haven't been doing it.
Yeah.
And I would do something on them, and they would actually make records that are there, sort of like the Norman Connors used to do in the 70s,
Yeah.
where it was his record, but he had like people sing the songs and all of that kind of stuff. But I just never came into the game, for that reason. I looked at Gerald as a brand, and plenty of times, and this is off the record, but
Yeah.
plenty of times I saw him talk about, what inspired him to write a song in an article or in an interview, and I was the one that wrote the song.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, I understood that he was the brand, and so if the brand did well, we both did well.
Hmm. Okay.
And so that's kind of like how I had to look at it, and I never had any problems with looking at it that way. That's the brand, and so if the notoriety goes to the brand, yes, there is some risk in that. Like if my name was on a record next to Gerald's, then the average layperson may assume that he was the talent.
Hmm.
But then I would have to say to them, you idiot, why would Gerald put my name on a record if I didn't do the work? He
Yeah.
wanted the Tony Nichols demographic or something? Like, really? It's like, you're not thinking, it's like there would be no reason for him to put me down if I didn't do the work.
Yeah.
Because it's like not that many people know who I am, so there would be no benefit for him doing that.
Yeah.
But I never cared. I just
Yeah.
never cared.
Okay. That's very fair. Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had prepared. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
But thanks for caring, man. Thanks for
Yeah.
being there. Thanks for giving me a chance to say, what's on my mind, because, stuff like this makes all the difference in the world, that somebody out there even cares, man. It's cool. It's a great thing. And I'm having a ball, man.
Yeah.
That's like all the best way I can put it.
Cool. Great. And I wish you the best of luck in the future, and I'm going to definitely, check out and, help promote your future projects.
Okay, I appreciate it. If you come across somebody you think that could, benefit from what I'm doing, send them my way.
Okay, cool. Definitely. Thanks again for taking the time for the interview.
Good to talk to you, man. Take care.
Take care, man.